Good evening. Thanks for having me. My name's Adraino Martinez, and I've really enjoyed being in Portland today. I got to spend some time with some other Earthjustice attorneys, Jamie and Ashley. Portland's great. We got to work on the sunshine thing in November, but I really had a good time. And I had a good time meeting with some of the advocates working on clean air. So I have excellent job security because I'm a smog attorney in Los Angeles. It is a job that will take a long time to solve, but I think it's also a job, and what's happening in California will benefit from what's happening here, but also folks in Oregon can take some of the stuff we're doing in California and implement it right here. So I work out of our Los Angeles office, and Earthjustice is a nonprofit environmental law firm. We do various types of litigation, in addition to some advocacy to protect our bedrock environmental laws. In particular, I work in our Right to Zero campaign, which is a campaign that's currently based out of California. And what we're doing is we're trying to get zero emissions in our energy sector, in our transportation sector, and in our buildings and industrial sector. And I think it's worth kind of giving a little bit of background about how do we come to this conclusion that we need to advance zero emissions. It actually came about because in California, our state agency that's responsible for clean air, the California Air Resources Board, they did an analysis of how do we meet three goals. First, how do we address our regional smog problem in places like Los Angeles and the San Joaquin Valley, which are two of the most polluted regions in the country. Second, they looked at how can we meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals that were set by our laws like AB 32. And then third, they looked at how do we protect local communities from toxic emissions like diesel exhaust. And in doing that analysis, it came to a surprising conclusion. A lot of people thought meeting our greenhouse gas laws were going to be the hardest thing to do. And that was actually wrong. What they found was the hardest thing to do was to meet our smog standards that are set by the federal and state government. And so to solve our ozone problem, we needed to go to zero emissions. And what we came to the conclusion of in our Right to Zero team was our best climate strategy in places like Los Angeles was to solve the air pollution crisis that was impacting millions of people. So what that meant was we had to rethink how we were approaching the work. Prior to that, air quality advocacy and regulation in Los Angeles was about incremental improvements. We were going to advance and push for clean air plans and regulations that would make a diesel engine slightly cleaner, make the water heater that's burning natural gas have a cleaner engine, switch some diesel to natural gas. It was incremental improvements. And what we said is we need to really shift this paradigm. We need to get rid of these incremental improvements and put all of our effort towards zero emissions. And so while Earthjustice was coming to this conclusion, we were benefited from a lot of work from close allies. As you know, Earthjustice, we're just lawyers. There's nothing more terrifying than just have lawyers go work on something. We need to have partners, clients, coalition, grassroots groups. And so while we were coming to this conclusion, our clients and coalition partners were coming to the same conclusion. And a lot of those clients were the folks living near sources of diesel and transportation pollution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done in California and Los Angeles, who our partners are, what strategies we're using to advance zero emissions. And I'm going to focus on transportation, one, because this is a discussion about diesel, and then two, all the other stuff I don't really do, so I would not be very helpful for you. Although Earthjustice has several great lawyers working on natural gas plants, building electrification, industrial electrification. So let's start with transportation. So in the Los Angeles region, our air pollution problems, the majority of the emissions are coming from the transportation sector. And when we think about transportation, a lot of people, naturally, their inclination goes to cars. Los Angeles and California have a lot of cars. That's a universal truth. I'm not going to deny that. But cars are becoming a smaller part of the air pollution problem. They're a big part of our greenhouse gas problem, but they're smaller. The major driver for our air pollution, our ozone and smog and diesel exhaust, they're the larger trucks, the construction equipment, the locomotives. The larger equipment is what's belching out a lot of the nasty stuff that's creating smog. So Earthjustice has some great partners that we work with nationally, but also in California. One is the Moving Forward Network. This is a coalition of grassroots groups, about 50 environmental justice groups around the country who are working on cleaning up our freight and logistics system. And so when I talk about the freight and logistics system, what I'm talking about are the seaports, the rail yards, the freight corridors, the distribution centers that bring goods and export goods throughout the country. And in particular, in Southern California, there's a robust network of folks working to clean up the port system. Another partner that's been very important to us and kind of a critical movement agent in Los Angeles has been the Los Angeles County Electric Truck and Bus Coalition. This is a coalition of environmental groups, of labor groups like the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, and then good jobs groups like Jobs to Move America, which kind of we've come together to do two things. One, we're pushing that we need to get all levers of the government, particularly our cities and our states, to commit to zero emission vehicles. In addition, we need to make sure that when we're using this money from the state, our money, that it's done in a way that creates good jobs with a pathway to success to middle class. So I'll start a little bit talking about buses, because I think that was some of the work that really started, and I'll give an explanation of why we're working on buses, because a lot of you heard me say trucks are the big problem, so why are we focused on buses? Buses are critical to advance zero emissions, mainly because the technology developments are closely related to trucks. As we develop technology on buses, we'll be able to transfer a lot of information to trucks. The other reason we like buses is a lot of buses are operated by public agencies. These are agencies that have no profit motive. So as we learn, how do you charge 100 buses, 200 buses, 1,000 buses? We're going to gain valuable information of how do we advance large fleets of larger vehicles like trucks and buses. So our coalition came together and we were pushing the nation's second largest transportation agency, the LA Metro, which is our regional transportation agency. We had our first planning meeting the day after this guy who some of you may have heard of, Donald Trump, was elected. Even though he's claiming he's an environmentalist, we came to that planning meeting and said, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? And so this was the day after his election. We got in a room, we had some pizza, and we had 4 hours to discuss and launch how are we gonna convince this transit agency to commit to zero emissions. And one of the big things takeaways is in a lot of these campaigns that we've done, the first thing to get forward is you just gotta ask. So all they can say is no. But we were surprised because in the midst of a national election that many viewed would be an environmental disaster, we saw local governments and state governments step up. And so we had some great political partners who were very interested in electric buses. And then one of the other kind of benefits that we found in California is as we move to new technology in the electric bus sector, it's going to create jobs. Mainly, that's why we have folks in the IBEW union engaged. They're interested in building the transportation electrification infrastructure, the chargers for these buses. We had folks from our sheet metal workers union involved and engaged because they wanted to work with the people who were actually putting together the buses in northern LA County. And then we had environmental groups who were together, obviously trying to address what is the biggest environmental, one of the biggest air quality threats in Southern California. So we were able to convince our LA Metro to commit to 100% zero emissions, and that was an important policy. We had the political leadership of this agency, which is local electeds, say we're going to zero by 2030. Staff at the agency weren't so excited. They wanted to continue along a natural gas path for their buses. They said, we spent 20 years switching from diesel to natural gas. Now you're going to tell us to go to electric? And our response was, yes, that's what we're going to do. So a couple of kind of takeaways from that I think are important in all these campaigns to push on state and local agencies on diesel emissions and moving to zero emissions. First, First, they're gonna, what we found over the years as we've approached them, when you say, hey, you need to commit to 100% zero emissions electric buses by 2030, first response is, we can't do that. And you just have to get past that. It's a lot of agencies will tell you you can't do it. You just gotta continue to push. You gotta talk about, well, your transit agency has some of the best transit engineers in the world. We're confident you can get there. And then you gotta push your political leaders to kind of really step up to the plate. As the video previously said, we have 11 years to address this thing. Moving our transit buses is a critical part of it. Another kind of campaign that we're taking on is we were looking for fleets of vehicles that touch people on a daily basis. And one fleet of vehicles that we found is particularly prime for advancing zero emission are refuse trucks. So these are trucks that haul recycling and waste in our communities. People are woken up by them. My daughter, every time she hears it, starts running outside to see it. So it's exciting. Yeah, I get kind of stressed because my 4-year-old is sitting there huffing some fumes from a refuse truck. But these are vehicles that we've determined are primed for electrification. These are vehicles that have fixed routes, start and stop, and they consume a heck of a lot of fuel. I think that the oil industry and the natural gas industry love refuse trucks because they burn a lot of fuel. So this is another place where you have inherently local conduct. You have local agencies, local city council people who are involved in this decision of whether they contract for a waste hauler like Waste Management or Republic, or if a city does it themselves. These are inherently local decisions. And I think this is where we're trying to harness the power of people to get their local electeds to make the decision, we're gonna advance zero emission, we're gonna put our tax dollars to work, our refuse collection dollars to work to advance zero emissions. Incidentally, this has been one of the more popular campaigns our coalition has taken on, because when you talk about a vehicle that's zero emissions, quieter, and everyone says, okay, sign me up, let's get this done. So this is one of these things where I think we're working to get some momentum in LA County, but we'd love to see other places really push on this piece. And then the final part I'm going to talk about, which is some of the work we've been doing about the ports and the logistics industry. This is a critical industry for the United States. And I'll acknowledge there are a lot of jobs associated with moving freight into and out of this country. But those jobs are also met with kind of an underbelly of the freight industry, which is the fact that kids, the elderly, residents around the country are getting poisoned from the diesel exhaust that is being emitted from the freight system. And it is poison. I mean, we shouldn't sugarcoat diesel exhaust or DPM, it's poison. California identified it as a toxic air contaminant in 1998, and we've been taking it seriously since then. In Los Angeles, the Los Angeles region, more than 70% of the toxics, the air risks, the risk from breathing in the region, risk from breathing toxics, comes from diesel exhaust. So it is one of our primary threats from a health perspective. And the other kind of important piece of it is there's a moral piece to it. A lot of the communities that are adjacent to the freight and logistics industry tend to be low-income communities of color. And this is well established through a lot of the research that EPA and others have done. So we've spent a lot of time working to clean up the freight industry, and it's been hard. Our first letter asking for zero emissions in the freight industry was 2007, and back then they didn't say, we can't do it. Their response is, you're crazy, this will never work. And so we kept pushing this forward, 2008, 2009. Eventually we've kind of gotten the freight industry to at least think about it. One thing we were able to get from the mayors of LA and Long Beach is a commitment to go to zero emissions for port trucks and cargo equipment on the docks by 2035 and 2030, respectively. And since then, we've been working to push manufacturers to make the equipment that's going to clean up the ports. This is an area that's really important. I think a lot of times in this discussion, it can seem kind of daunting because there's a lot of diesel fuel burned, and there's a lot of diesel equipment. And one of the things, the reason why people like diesel equipment is it lasts forever. Not forever, but a long time. Back before the ports of LA and Long Beach were pushing to clean up the ports, we had a truck from 1941 that was still operational in the early 2000s. So it was just really old equipment that was heavily polluting. And one of the interesting things is our prior strategy, as I mentioned before, was incremental. Let's get a cleaner diesel truck, let's get a natural gas truck. And about a decade ago, we kind of shifted from that strategy. And I think what the Los Angeles and Long Beach story tells us is we've gotten our political leadership in our freight industry not to question whether we're going to go to zero emissions. We've started to, after years of pounding on the agency, pushing the industry, we're now at the discussion of how we're going to do it and when. Even though we have dates from the mayors, those are nice fancy things where there's a press conference, but we're still pushing the industry to actually achieve those dates. And I think one of the things that's very inspirational about the advancement of zero emissions is it's moving very fast. Batteries are cheaper now than they were 3 years ago. The costs are coming down. And in fact, in some models of how much it costs to operate a diesel truck, we're finding that over the full life of the truck, it's cheaper to operate a zero emission or an electric truck. And I think that's promising for several reasons, because instead of focusing on the technology not working and the cost, we're trying to figure out how do we overcome some of these financial barriers that exist to getting more of these vehicles on the road. And then, so we've got a lot of great stuff happening in Los Angeles and Long Beach, but I think this is really where the folks in Oregon can come to play, because as you'll hear tonight, diesel emissions are a serious issue for Oregonians. Is that I don't even know if that's a phrase. That might be the wrong phrase. The people in Oregon, people in Portland. Oregonians, okay, I just want to make sure. I don't want to be that person who comes in and says some weird term. calling people from Oregon something that they don't like. All right, Oregonians, yeah. So diesel exhaust is a big issue. Because I think the thing about diesel exhaust, even though we have hundreds of thousands of trucks congregated in places like Los Angeles and Long Beach, the problem with diesel, it's an issue of proximity. You can have one truck next to a playground, 2 trucks. You can have a locomotive. This is causing harm to people. And this is a problem that should be addressed. So here's the thing, in Los Angeles we're doing a lot of great work. It's a very uphill battle. The freight industry is very powerful, but we're pushing. We got a great group of partners and lawyers and scientists, and we're just pushing really hard. But here's where I think Oregon comes to play. One of the good things that we've found as the federal government has kind of been a disaster on environmental protection is that we're starting to see a competitive nature between states, local governments. Oh, New York City's doing this. Our mayor in LA, Eric Garcetti's like, well, I want to do 10 times that. And this is an important moment because we have a lot of power in cities and states to do good, to show leadership, because we're not seeing it in Washington, D.C. And so what I want is, so LA does a lot of great things, but we also do a lot of things that aren't very good. So I want lots of commitments coming from Oregon, zero emission refuse trucks, buses, trucks, delivery trucks, locomotives, forklifts. So I can go to our folks in LA and say, look what Portland's doing. They're lapping us on this zero emissions front. Let's get our act together. And then when we're doing our stuff in Los Angeles and Oakland, the San Joaquin Valley, you can take it to your folks who want to be progressive, who want to deliver for their constituents, say, look what Los Angeles is doing. And you know, a little Los Angeles bashing from folks in other places, we'll accept it. It's okay. You can say, you know, look, this is Hollywood. You know, they can do it. You should do it. So, you know, I think in a weird way, the zero emission stuff is really being fueled on the local level. And it's really just about making demands and being clear. We found that there was pushback initially, but now we're starting to get a lot of progress. We're starting to see a lot of these vehicles come out. And so I think this is a great time to kind of push forward. Now, a couple tips I have on as you're pushing for zero emissions, one of the biggest hurdles that we had to overcome is people said these things didn't exist or they aren't there. One of the things we found that was a very powerful tool is just snap a photo, post it on Twitter. You can follow me at LA Smog Guy. If you really are interested in LA pollution, politics, and coverage, you can follow it. But just getting it out there, you know, using the Instagram account that we talked about earlier, showing people that these electric buses, these electric trucks, they exist. In fact, I think Oregon, they're going to be manufacturing electric trucks. So this is a really important piece. If we see something that's clean, take a photo of it. Show people that it exists, because there's a lot of skepticism out there. And the more we can get out there showing them it exists, the more when you go to talk to the mayor or the governor or whomever you're talking to, you can say, hey, look, I saw an electric bus the other day. Why don't you commit to 100% by 2030, you know, or whatever date you may choose. But I think this is exciting times. I think I have the more optimistic part of the presentation. There's going to be a presentation on how bad the problem is next. But yeah, I look forward to working with my Oregonian friends to get more progress down south in LA, and then help push for more zero emissions up here to solve this diesel pollution crisis. Thank you. Thanks.